Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast for Backlot Banter, where us four Backlot boys review every single Palme d'Or winner. And the catch is, we do it in random order. Of course, our lives are dictated by that oh-so-holy rotund shape that will be making an appearance at the end of this episode. The random spin wheel, we love it. We pray to it. Today, we are talking about De Rode Enge, or Red Meadows, as it is translated from its native Danish, is a 1945 film, winner of, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, Tanner, the 1947 Palme d'Or? 1946 ceremony. Okay.
Yes.
Directed by Bodil Ibsen and Lau Lauritsen, some Scandinavian fellas. It's a film about the...
Scandinavian, I like that.
Well, we could talk about the plot synopsis. It's a World War II movie. I'll leave it at that for now, just to wet your whistle a little bit before we dutifully dive in and talk about the film as we do every week. But before that, we've got to remind you of what happened last time, because we talked about Abbas Kiarostami's film Taste of Cherry, and it was a very enlightening discussion, but we just couldn't give it as high score as any of the other films that we'd seen so far. So it got a 6.4 out of 10, which puts it at the worst spot on our list, even though 6.4 is pretty good if you're thinking about it in terms of, all the movies. We'll see where this one goes. I don't know where I'm going to put it yet. But I highly recommend going and watching that Taste of Cherry review, because I think we really got to new intellectual depths and maybe learn something about each other on that one.
Sure. Hopefully we do that every episode,
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. A gold star.
We bare our souls during Quest.
Now, Abram, there might be some viewers of ours who have bared their souls to us in the comment section. Do you have anyone you want to shout out?
So here's the situation, guys. The comments have been slow. They've been very few and far between. So you guys really need to let us know in the comments below what you thought of Red Meadows. And if you haven't seen Red Meadows, which you probably haven't, just make something up.
Yeah.
Just so we have a comment for next week. But this time what we're going to do is really going to follow up on a personal saga opposed to a reflection on a previously reviewed film. Because our beloved son, John Tor 11, who has been lurking in the background, has returned for a comment, but not about the film that he commented on, Barton Fink, but instead to continue a narrative.
I see.
For people who might be tuning in for the first time, John Tor 11, our treasured son, on the Red Meadows review, has said... not just said, but promised that he would watch all 9 core Star Wars films and report back his feelings. He thought he was trying to duck the challenge. We called him out live on air, and now he's come with his response. Quote, Abram, I haven't forgotten about the deal. I failed the task, but the deal is still on. A lot of work came in the way, and then Sarah Michelle Gellar showed up. We'll see. Maybe I can squeeze in a 9-movie Star Wars marathon during the Christmas holidays.
You watch Buffy.
Oh, that's right. My bad.
Yeah, last time we spoke to our son, John Tor, he was watching Buffy. Got time over the Christmas holidays. If you're not going to watch the Palme d'Or winners, watch Star Wars.
If you're not going to watch Red Meadows, why not watch episode 4?
Better, might argue, than Red Meadows.
Whoa!
Jumping the gun a little bit.
Week. Need more comments. Please give us more comments.
Yeah, please give us more comments.
Any comments, actually.
Yeah. Any and all are appreciated. We rag on the commenters who are like, blah, 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 young boy, don't know how to review a movie, blah, 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 but...
At least they comment.
We kind of love those comments, too,
Yeah, we do. We have a fun time with those.
Definitely some fun with
So if you want to comment
ranking?
exactly what I just said, be more than welcome. You're more than welcome to do that.
Yeah.
I want the hair ranking now, and the mustache ranking.
Oh, okay.
Ooh,
Sure. Right,
okay.
Sure.
Well, let's be done with these comments and get some thoughts, some impressions on...
Salutes.
That's the end,
That's
Tucker.
the end.
We gotta say that till the end.
Oh my God. I couldn't even get one tiny little bit into the discussion of this movie, and we've already started joking about that ending. If you don't know, the way the movie ends is the word for the end in Danish says slut up on the screen. I say it with the Danish pronunciation.
SLUT is the spelling.
And it's just...
It just says that in just big bold text on the screen, middle of the screen.
Yeah, and it's just a big brassy hit at the end to really drive home the drama at the end too.
It's kind of just an odd way to end that makes the film sticks in your mind.
Let's talk about this movie.
So let's talk about the film
Yes.
because now we've got that out of the way.
Yes.
Tanner, what did you think?
Yeah.
Hold on. Summary.
Oh,
Can't forget. The first week after we covered your summary,
You're
we can't
right.
cover the summary.
That's my bad.
Do the
my
summary,
bad.
Abram.
Yeah.
Oh, this is going to be tough.
Well, I mean, hey, it's been what, 90 minutes since you've seen the movie?
I mean, Abram, I can take it if you like me.
No, I think he needs to do it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. This is a film about revolutionary fighters during World War II.
Yeah.
And essentially, we followed the lives of a couple of key characters. Our main revolutionary resistance leader, his name is Michel, and he's surrounded by some others, and Michel is in a relationship with Ilsa. And this film kind of plays out across two fronts on sort of a...
Pretty sure her name is Ruth.
What was I thinking
so.
about?
I think
You
her
might be
last
thinking of
name
Mission
is...
Impossible.
Oh, I'm always thinking about Mission Impossible.
Oh,
You're right.
that's true. Elsa Lund, yeah.
So we got Ruth. Hold
Uh-huh.
on. Let me pull it back here. Again, on the plot level, we're following Michel as he is sabotaging German facilities, and he is furthering his cause, always at the risk of imprisonment and death, which is, well, partially what befalls him before he escapes at the end of the film. But at the same time that we're watching this sort of war tableau play out, Ruth, his longtime girlfriend, but not wife, they've been living together 12 years, as we learned from an interrogator, is opining about the fact that her very idealistic and revolutionary partner is, well, always just a moment or two away from death. So ultimately, while we follow Michel as he's carrying out these covert operations and then getting thrown in prison and fighting for his life, we're also thinking in the back of our head sort of what putting your life on the line for a cause means. What's more important, the individual or that cause, and things of that nature. But that's what we'll talk about as we review Red Meadows.
Yes.
Good plot synopsis. And to spoil it, it has a happy ending. He gets away at the end.
Well, kind of a happy ending.
Yeah, well, yeah.
He gets away, but not everyone does.
Yeah.
No.
So, Tanner, give me your thoughts.
Yes.
With much ado, we finally hear some opinions
go.
on this movie.
Okay.
But not about nothing.
So this movie's 85 minutes long, which kind of like ties into exactly what I'm gonna my overarching thought about it is that I didn't surprise I didn't know a whole lot about this film going into it. But much
Logged by 385 people on Letterboxd ever.
and now we are three of them, I think. Now it was at 382 before. So
Four of them.
I'm
Well,
off
he wasn't
the
using
Letterboxd way.
Yeah.
I haven't used it in like a year.
Anyway,
I see.
Red Meadows is like, to me, just like a really solid and engrossing, like kind of basically a spy thriller. It's about these saboteurs in Nazi-occupied Denmark. And honestly, it flies by, and I think that is a strength and a weakness at times. I think sometimes it can move a little too fast, especially when we sort of have a pretty intricately connected group of saboteurs who one of them might be a mole. That's an element of the plot as well, and we towards the end of the film discover who that is. But I feel we never got a good understanding of that character. But ultimately, what it does do is that it does draw you in by moving pretty snappily through these sequences, and then punctuating it with the big assaults on. They mostly attack airplane part manufacturing factories, and these sequences are pretty like engrossing. You're doing the gamer lean when they're going on, because they're just like, they do draw you in. I feel like Paul Reichhardt as well is a pretty solid lead for this thing, and the overarching or maybe the underlying themes of why people are doing this and why he feels compelled to do this, even though he has a loving, long-time girlfriend who sort of is very worried for his safety, and how he is placing like the betterment of his countrymen and the betterment of Europe as a whole, doing his part, and is it worth it anymore to keep fighting this fight? I think that those are solid all underlying themes, and all around I felt this movie was quite solid.
Abram, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I mirror Tanner in large part. I found this film incredibly compelling, more so than I expected to, really. I think that it's familiar, ultimately. I mean, we're not really doing a lot of sort of thematic posturing that we've not seen before. It is a fairly, I don't want to call it a rote plot line instead of characters, but you got your mole, you got your love interest, you got your, what are we fighting for? It's the tropes are there, but the tropes I think are executed fairly well. But I would agree with you, Tanner, that I think a lot of the appeal of the film is on a plot level. The characters, I think, are effective, and there's some quite affecting interpersonal scenes, particularly towards the end of the film. But I don't necessarily know if we learn enough to really pull me in, especially when some characters like Ruth end up feeling quite one note. But I think this is a very interesting film to contextualize around the fact that it released in 1945. Yep. As World War II ends, this film releases. It's being made while that conflict is still going on. So I think that element of the production and of the story of this movie is quite compelling, and I have a lot of fun watching it. Well, fun is maybe not the right word because it's a fairly dour film, but it has a very, I think, kinetic and watchable quality to it. And at 85 minutes, it's kind of hard to complain about the runtime there, right? Unless you're asking for more, but ultimately I don't really think these characters sort of support more. I don't know necessarily. I think you probably needed to get deeper into them if we're going to start justifying a longer runtime. But I had a surprisingly good time here. I just don't know if it's going to sort of stick around in my head in the pantheon of great war films, or even contemporary war films, or going back to things like All Quiet on the Western Front, which obviously we reviewed in the previous quest. But better than I expected, I'll say. How about that?
Wow. Yeah. Tucker, your thoughts?
I struggled to find this movie engrossing. I felt that the pacing and the editing and the character work especially kept pushing me away because I found it very difficult to understand what was going on. And then once I did find out what was going on, I found it really simple. The way that the characters speak very fast in a foreign language and the subtitles are just flying by, I was like stumbling over myself to try to keep up with these conversations. And then when I tried to scan for context clues throughout the scenes, like, okay, well, I guess, okay, so there's a mole and he is running away and there's some other guys and they're going to do this thing. And I was like, that's not as interesting as I thought it was going to be because they were like talking super fast and yelling at one another. I was like, oh, that's all. And structurally, while the story is very simple, I found the fact that it is very cutty aroundy, we're jumping between people and places and sequences, I found that to be really disorienting. Like a scene would just end and then two other people that I'm not sure if I've seen before are talking about something entirely different in a different place. And I'm like, is this starting a new plot line or is this attaching back to something that happened before? I frankly, I know what happened in this movie, but I do not understand this movie at all. I found it so hard to understand the moment-to-moment goings-on. And then again, when I did find out what was going on, I found myself completely uninterested by it, especially by the character work, because I think characters are basically not interesting at all. Like, they have an interesting situation, but personality-wise, I don't know anything about these people. Their conflicts, like when it happens, it's like, okay, that's a conflict, but I don't necessarily care. It's a movie that exists to talk about what a scenario of these kind of people in World War II would have been like. And I respect it and understand it from that way, especially for the time period. But as a modern day viewer, it does feel rote to me. It feels like mole, love interest, sabotage, done. And I didn't like this movie. I found basically nothing to grab onto in it. And I didn't care for almost any of it filmically. And I found it very, very hard to follow with and understand.
Well, I think I fall somewhere in the middle because while I think that like the spy and noir elements of this film are pretty interesting, and kind of the text of the film, what these characters say to each other is really where I think the meat is of the movie. But the bones are kind of lacking, I think, a little bit. I don't really. I think the pacing is all right. It's good at times and it's bad at other times. So I found myself being a little bored by it towards the end in the final 25 minutes or so. Because watching it with my roommate, and he was like, I want to go to bed right now. And I was like, bro, there's like no more, it's 25 minutes. Just sit here and watch the rest of this.
Yeah. It did feel like it was going to end like 3 different times.
Yeah. But I think that the frame narrative is one that I've came to understand. It wasn't one that was I got right off the bat, but I didn't, like, once I understood it, I was like, okay, he is in prison. He's remembering the events that led him to be in prison, and then it continues after we get to that point in his memory. That was effective, and so I'm kind of middling on it. It's kind of, I've seen better war movies, and I've seen better war movies that deal with similar thoughts on World War II, on the idea of resistance. I'm thinking, I think it's a Lubitsch film. I'm gonna have to Google it while someone else is talking, but it's a film that is about the same idea of what do you sacrifice to fight for your freedom, and that's I think a somewhat interesting topic for this film to delve into.
Yeah. Well, where do we want to delve into this film? There's a couple of different avenues we can go down. I think the most obvious to me is to start with Abram was saying Michelle, but I'm gonna say Michael. I'm just gonna railroad you into saying Michael. I think, I don't know, but I think that
they speak so fast. I have no idea.
They also are speaking a language which half the time sounds like
and then it's Danish, so oftentimes they'll just throw in a word that sounds identical to English, which sounds kind of fun. Anyway,
Tanner, can I actually interrupt you? Can we actually start with this point about the language and the tempo of the film as a viewer?
Absolutely.
Because I think that's an interesting high-level place to start before we even get to characters. Because I actually agree with you, Tucker. I watched this as soon as I had just finished working, and I'd just been spending the last couple hours intensively reading and editing a book. So I started watching, and the subtitles are moving. I'm like, fuck, I might just literally physically be too tired to watch this movie. This might be this might be a skill issue in my brain at the moment. But I think the reality is, and I don't know if I've seen much Danish film, if any film before. So I think that, that is obviously viewer side a hurdle to overcome in watching the film, but it also really drops us into a moment of tension that does in some ways feel quite contextless. I agree with you, Tucker, because I felt in the early minutes of the film as though I was in for something that is a lot more experimental or a lot more sort of fragmented than the film ends up being, I think.
Yeah, sure.
I think once you get to prison and then you realize, this is a frame narrative about Michael writing a letter back to Ruth, I think the pieces start to fall into place and the tracks kind of lay themselves. But I wouldn't say the film starts on a particularly good foot. I think it took me a little bit of time. Again, there's not much time in the film, which is maybe to an amplified detriment here, that it took me a little bit to really get into the pace of what we're after. Because we're taking some barrels onto a boat, and there's
the opening acts of sabotage are...
Well, it's interesting because I felt that the same way. And when Tanner started his talk about this movie by saying it was very snappily paced, I was like, I don't remember that at all. I mean, I think it certainly does pick up pace, but especially I think that opening 20 plus minutes are, I looked over at Tanner and I'm like, this movie's 85 minutes and nothing has fucking happened yet. I'm like, someone forgot to tell these writers that they only have 85 minutes to do shit.
It was the opening sequence when Michael first lays down on his bed, and you see it all happen in real time. He's very much just kind of puttering around his cell and trying to figure out what letter he is going to write to Ruth, and then laying down on his bed. And Tucker turns to me and he says, someone should tell this guy he's only got 85 minutes to do the rest of this movie. We just started.
Yeah. I also think that because that is a disconnected opening, we're dropped right in the middle of it. We probably know his name, but just in passing. We certainly don't know anything about his character or the situation, which is a totally fine in medias res way to start a film. It's not necessarily bad, but I do think that with then jumping back in time to have to pick up the pieces set me on the wrong foot to understanding this movie, understanding the characters, understanding the narrative, because it did feel so choppy and, to your point, Abram, contextless, that I'm like, usually when you drop in medias res, you are supposed to immediately be understanding who these people are, what's going on, what's the conflict, so that when you jump back, you're able to build up the context to something that you're familiar with. Whereas it was like, okay, a guy's in prison. And then we jump back in time and we have to get to know all these characters and the scenario. It's like, There's so much going on.
What we do is we immediately we transition, a cool transition, I might add.
Oh yeah,
to a whole gaggle of saboteurs riding in a truck in the middle of the night in the Danish countryside.
Yeah.
From there, it is understood. You later find out that like they're getting some explosives like airdropped to them in the middle of this field. And that's what they're going to go pick up there. That's where we learn the character's name, at least from my recollection. We learn Michael's name from one of these fellow saboteurs there. I believe it might be Pricken. It's one of those. It's one of the young-faced ones.
That's the only other name I can remember for this movie.
Pricken, Toto, Dreyer.
That was a Toto.
Yeah. There's actually a scene with Toto that I'd like to talk about specifically. But yeah, that's where we learn his name, and you do kind of get this feeling that he's a leader of this resistance, or a leader in this resistance. He's sort of looked up to by maybe these younger guys, and he is quite, he has a history with this group. He feels a bit more haggard by the whole situation, I think. He also feels confident in what he's doing. At no point does he ever seem like overwhelmed at his situation. He always feels like quite cool-headed and level-headed, even when there are German brown shirts or a Gestapo breaking down his door to shoot him in the middle of the night. He feels quite confident and competent in like carrying out his acts as a saboteur or a spy or whatever you want to call him. But yeah, that's kind of like the read on Michael that I initially get. But I do agree that it could, if we're going to start in medias res, thank you, Tucker. Then I do think, we maybe need to start in a bit more of a smart screenwriting place of like, here's these people, here's what they're doing, instead of having to like backfill that info.
I think though that we are, this movie did come out in 1945. Like, this context of the movie
that's a fair point.
It has to be so unbelievably seared into everybody who's watching its mind that I think these are valid points from our perspective, but from the perspective of a first-time viewer when it came out, I think that you understand exactly what's going on the moment the movie starts.
Sure. I mean, I actually felt that quite a few times throughout. It was like I was sitting in a room with a bunch of people, and they're all talking about the play, and I'm like, okay, I think enough about World War II to like give some context to this, but the conflicts and the Danish perspective on it, and the culture of these people, and the things that they fought for in the past, and the sabotaging, I'm like, I feel like this is something I would understand if I had been born 90 years ago, but I'm not, and so for the context of them just talking about it, I feel almost like an outsider. Usually a screenplay and the writing of characters wants to pull you into the group to make you feel like you're instantly a part of it and can understand the dynamics. But for me, especially because this is a major criticism I want to get into, I felt like the characters largely ended up becoming interchangeable. I felt like I was an outsider when they were doing all this talking and planning. I'm like, I'm sure you guys know what you're talking about, but I sure do not.
Well, here's the thing. It is interesting that we bring that up because, and Timo, thank you for mentioning like the contextualizing this thing as a Danish film that came out in 1945. Because
let me think about this. That
go for it.
A year or 2 years before this film is released, and definitely like less than that while it's being made, there were real Nazis occupying their country and imprisoning their men. Like this stuff is like so not removed from the reality that there's I think that is kind of what the film is maybe leveraging here at Cannes.
Of course.
The reason that it wins.
And that's an element of it that I did in retrospect enjoy about this film, is that it feels so of the time and in the moment. And to the point of us saying that, maybe it felt a bit alienating as modern viewers coming into it. I think for at the time especially, it's like you're going to be on the side of these guys and be the in for them because the other option is the Nazis.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the only other characters here. And speaking of, I do appreciate that we don't have our Nazi characters, our Nazi costumes are not like arm banded with the big swastika on the side, like because they're probably just using real costumes that were left behind in Denmark.
Yeah.
And so they're not like they're not decked out in all the swastikas and like the skull cap thing. It feels quite authentic because it is. And I think that can be said of the whole film, that it feels authentic to the time and authentic to the experience, and perhaps meant to like display to the Danish movie audience.
Perhaps? Absolutely, it's supposed to.
Oh,
this film is didactic as fuck. This film wants you to go out and fight for your country so bad. Yeah.
It's not even that. It's like here are the people who are going thankless right now. It's something that a line that the I believe Michael has is like, when the war's over, we're not going to get thanked. We're just doing this in the moment because it's the right thing to do and we feel called to do it.
There's also a line at the very beginning of the film. I think it's when we've not yet even gotten into the prison. We're like from the outside, like the perspective of a hawk, and we're pushing into the building. And there's a line to the effect of like all the heroes right now are in prison, or we're gonna look back and realize that the heroes were in prison or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we can, in a lot of ways, like when we talked about, it was Miss Miniver, right? Which was openly propagandistic in terms of trying to engage Americans in the war effort. I don't think we can remove the context and the sort of rhetoric of this film, or its kind of gets more rhetorical function from its engagement. I mean, I don't think it necessarily cares whether you are invested in the particular plight of Michael. I think the film even maybe wants the opposite to happen, for it to be a little bit more universalized. So you just see yourself in that room with these nicely dressed, handsome guys planning and executing these interestingly, like, it's interesting because I think the film both like romanticizes them and it doesn't.
Yeah, I think
in particular, go ahead, Timo.
I think this gets into the meat of the film. Is part of it is an uneasiness, almost like a clash between the need to commit violent acts of destruction and killing in order to save your country, but the kind of and then the fear of death that comes with that, and the realization that that what they want to do, their enemies will do back to them, and so they have no choice but to accept death. The kind of clash between that and just the wanting to live a peaceful life. I think just like the way that the film itself is not trying to be like, these guys are totally great, these guys are like completely awesome. The representations of what they do is pretty gruesome, and I don't think the film wants to shy away from the reality of what this time in history required of these men.
I think an interesting scene to bring into conversation is maybe the first scene that really grabbed me in the film, which is when the Nazis have arrived to capture Michael.
Yeah.
And he's shooting at them through the door. I not only think that is pretty exciting filmmaking, and there's a number of moments in this movie that I would like to talk about, particularly that are exciting filmmaking. But to your point, Timo, this sort of noir set of sensibilities in this sequence, and
which comes with the filmmaking, I believe, like the dark shadows and the low contrast darkness. It's dark. This movie's dark AF.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty compelling, seeing, and indicative of what you're saying, Timo, seeing our protagonist or hero. I would say protagonist might be closer, even though he's very clearly. I thought he was going to be martyred by the end of the film, and sort of my reading. But seeing him in that light of being pretty slick and getting out of there, but then meeting a 16-year-old outside, I think the film very quickly sobers you from the sort of stylized and more like visceral filmmaking of the action. Oh, the person he's now confiding in is a child in this conflict.
Yeah.
I think it interestingly tempers a lot of the more like bombastic, I guess you could say, sequences.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's also because those sequences are relatively few and far between. I think we probably get like 3 or so more action-packed moments, because even when it is like more spy sections, We get Michael dressing up in Nazi costume and riding over in the ferry and doing some sneaking around, and writing letters and doing all that. There is there's a sense of slowness to those sequences as we're going to watch each of the bits of preparation and we're going to watch them go through these motions and then sort of recover from it. And I find that to be pretty interesting, but I do think it is, to your point, something that keeps this movie from feeling like an action movie. It is a very much plotting movie. I mean, I don't mean PLODD, I mean PLOTT. Plotting. They're plotting a lot of different things in this.
And scheming.
And I think that plotting and scheming, absolutely. They're scheming and memeing. But the thing is that while I find the concept of a lot of these plots to be interesting, of, okay, we're going to sabotage this factory, we're going to find out who the mole is, we're going to make sure that this guy gets back so we can execute the plan on time. On high level, I find those interesting. But I do think that on a very subjective level, my disconnect from the characters and the difficulty that I had understanding the plot, even for as simple as it is, made it very difficult for me to get invested in the moment. And it wasn't until the film sort of unshackled itself and allowed there to be these moments of quick action, or I think especially when they get caught planting that bomb. I think that's probably the most memorable sequence in the film, and they're laying down on the ground and they're using the guns that have the clip out coming out the top, and I'm like, that is something that, like, on a visceral filmmaking engagement level, it sort of snapped me into the reality of this is, like, very important to these people, because outside of that, because I didn't know who they were or really the time scale of things or their previous relationships largely, I found it difficult to, like, engage myself with the plight of these people. I agree with you, Abram, that it's much more a movie about these are heroes people that are heroic doing things and wanting to, like, universalize and rah, I want to fight the bad guys as well. But I found that disconnect from the personal side of it to be something that was only, like, let go when there was something a little bit more kinetic going on, which is occasionally in this film, but certainly the vast majority of its runtime.
Let's talk about the plight of our characters, shall we? Because I agree, Tucker, that, like, those moments of action are pretty impressive and pretty, like, engrossing. When we're laying down cover fire and we're getting away in the truck and we're taking, like, fire from inside the truck.
Of assaulting the factory and blowing it up is that's a great sequence. It's very kinetic and boom, it's tense. You're in, you like understand who all the players and what's going to happen, and it's great.
And they're also, like, holding the groups of different Nazis at gunpoint.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh god, they're, like, playing cards with their pants down. Or there's one guy's, like, on the floor, like, get up, we're breaking in. And he's like, oh, okay.
I will just note, while we finish this sequence, and we'll stop hijacking you, Tanya, will talk about the characters.
It's okay.
I think that there is some genuinely impressive filmmaking there. The shot of Michael blowing the factory and then the factory exploding really behind him is pretty fucking nuts. And I think that the sound of the gunfire, the frantic sense as more and more Nazis pour into the factory, as we're cutting back to Michael, as we're trying to load people onto the truck, it just is a genuinely really well constructed scene.
It is.
And I think that those are the set pieces, obviously, of the film. But I think that the well-constructed nature extends to some non-action sequences as well, which are more character-driven. So before we get to those, let's get to the character part.
Okay. The key moment for me here is, there is twofold. There is when Michael first gets back and talks with Ruth, and we sort of get to know that dynamic. That Ruth is like, I appreciate what you're doing, but you've been committed to it for so long, and each day that passes means that the likelihood of you dying grows greater and greater. And I just can't live with that. Like, you need to give this up. And Michael's like, I can't give it up. And you know this. You know how committed I am to this, because and then that conversation morphs when he is talking to the character of Toto, I believe. I think it's Toto. I really only know that because I was matching up faces in the IMDb or the Letterboxd cast list. So it's like it's basically right before they kick off their plan to hijack the truck and get into the factory, and it's this conversation about why they're doing what they're doing, and is it a fruitless endeavor, basically. Because Michael says the people here, the Danish people, they hear an explosion, they hear gunfire, and they just go right back to sleep. Like, we are.
That's a good line.
Yeah, we are. I think they say we're like maybe 1% of the population is doing this, fighting an entire army, and we're doing this for people who seemingly are reticent to the matter, like who will just turn over and turn out the light on us, essentially. And I found that to be a really interesting take, like maybe even kind of like it's cynical and hopeful in the same time, in the same way, about rebellion and anti-fascist sort of protest and sabotage. And there was another line that Toto has, I think. There's just a good line. It's kind of like a good action movie line, because I do think that at its heart, the film is somewhat of an action film. He's like, yeah, I long for the day when I know that the truck pulling up outside is the milkman and not the Gestapo.
Yeah.
But there is stuff about that. There's stuff in that conversation that I think really drills into the heart of like why these guys continue to do this. There's an anti-centrist line. I wrote down anti-centrist. I'd be ashamed if I didn't feel either way about it. Like, not that I'd be ashamed if I wasn't fighting for my country. I'd be ashamed if I was just like 99% of the population and just turned out the light when I heard gunfire outside.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that is obviously one of the key. I don't know if actionable is the right word, but one of the key takeaways if you're an audience member in that moment, because he's essentially admonishing you for something you literally just did. And it goes back to Timo's point before of the absurd prescience of this film. I mean, it could not be any more prescient. This is Don't Look Up, Adam McKay climate change level of prescience here. I want to talk about Ruth, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I largely take issue with the characterization of Ruth.
That's fair.
Just in that I feel like the trope of the love interest who just wants him to come home.
She's effectively the picture in the locket, is what she is.
Yeah.
She's
She is.
gotta get back to Ruth. There's one thing that's keeping me alive, that's keeping me doing this. I gotta get back to her.
I mean, this is a trope across war cinema, across like detective cinema, police cinema, fucking superhero cinema. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
But I think it's particularly frustrating here because that is largely all Ruth is given to do, except for what is maybe my favorite sequence in the entire film, which is when Ruth and Michael are stopped on their bikes by the security. And the foresight of Ruth beforehand to say, "Give me your gun. I will keep this. I know something. In some ways, it's an interesting moment because just as I think that there's obviously a very male hand writing and orchestrating this film and giving her what is a very one-dimensional role for the only female character in the movie, it feels like Ruth as a character also realizes the sort of misogyny of the context and uses it to her benefit in that moment with the gun in the handbag. So 100%. I find that to be really interesting. I think probably partially intentional, partially unintentional, just a symptom of the gender dynamic of the time.
Yeah.
But I like when Ruth in that moment has a position in the resistance and she is a little bit more than just, I want you to leave this so you can come live with me. The poetics of the meadow being turned red, I do like, but I just think that Ruth could and should have been more.
Yeah, we don't even see them reunited at the end of the film. We just see them hop on the old tugboat and go off into the dark,
Yeah, the sound
indeed
as it goes away.
So true, Timo, so true.
I think so you bring up a good point about this scene with the gun, Abram and Ruth, because I kind of liked her characterization at the beginning because while you're right that her character doesn't get to do a whole lot in the film, the exact lines of dialogue seem to like evince to me a greater understanding of her kind of place within this conflict and her like what she can do and what she can't do and how she would really like her her partner to not go out and do these things that she can't stop him because he is so set in his ways. And I appreciate, I think, that the film doesn't like force them into acrimony about this, that they have an understanding between each other. Because I think that, going back to the didacticism of this film, this is another moment of her character is like, okay, ladies, listen up. Here's how you should act in this circumstance. And nowadays I think we'd want women to do some more of the blowing shit up too. But like that to me is, I think, effective filmmaking, even though it's outdated. It's very outdated.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like Call of Duty Vanguard where you get to play as a female sniper.
It's not. It's really not, Abram. It's really not. To that end, though, to the end of Ruth essentially being the picture in the locket for Michael, I think it does sort of give Paul Reichert some material to work with later in the film, especially when we are after he's been captured, after after they blow up the factory and he's been captured and he's put in prison. We sort of circle back around to the first bookend at the beginning of the film. He is in prison. He is being tortured and interrogated by Nazi officers for information about the saboteurs there. By a man, I might add, who, I'm gonna guess, not a mistake, that he looks strikingly like Adolf Hitler, like a lot like Adolf Hitler. He's got the mustache. He's got the face shape. I think he's wearing no, it's not. He doesn't have. Does he have glasses?
He does have glasses.
He does. But I as soon as he popped up, I was like, I think they got the guy because he looks a lot like Hitler. Anyway, he's being interrogated by these characters. And we give that guy basically his villain monologue moment where he's like, we'll break you because you don't like to talk. Oh, we'll make you talk. We'll torture you until you have no choice but to talk. And then we'll go after the people that you love too. And when he mentions Ruth, Paul Reichert gets this moment, and it's not earth-shattering acting stuff because it was 1945, but it was his eyes go wide and then he has to contort back to this steely gaze as he stares down basically Hitler. And so I just thought that was a good moment from Paul, and maybe from the screenwriters and the directors as well, is to give him this moment where the Nazi officer does break his demeanor, and it's all relied on his love for Ruth and his desire to get back to her, because that's the kind of the wish that she imparted to him last time that they talked.
Yeah, I think that's the best moment of characterization.
Yeah,
for Michael is the torture sequence, where I think Paul Reichert's acting is at its most distinct and memorable throughout the entire film. I think he's totally serviceable in most of it, but it really was that scene where it's all facial acting and he doesn't say a word.
Yep.
And he's being tortured and he's staring it down, and sometimes it breaks and sometimes he comes back.
Sometimes he goes, stop.
Yeah, he did do that one very short scream. But I really did like that in terms of grounding me in a moment with tension between two characters whose motivations I understand. And I think that wordlessly, but I think very effectively, communicates his commitment to his cause and to not being the guy that's going to squeal even while he's having something happen to his fingers. They're being crushed, I guess.
They're in the
really
contraption.
Yeah, they're in a contraption.
Yeah, they put him in the contraption.
And
it's so sad. Everyone pray for Michael. He's in the contraption.
But he's sitting there, and his fingers are getting sandwiched. They're panini pressed, and he's just
they're in the George Foreman,
staring things down. And I'm like, this is. I mean, it's not a particularly long sequence, but I think that might be one of my favorite parts of the film, because I think it instantly engaged me with how committed this guy is, and of course that is said a lot by all the people that are especially talking about him. It's like, oh yeah, no, he's our leader. We're gonna follow him. He's the one that we need to search for a sense of leadership. But while I see him do a lot of things, it isn't until that moment I'm like, okay, yeah, he's not bullshitting. He's taking the torture and sitting there while his fingers are being smashed and just staring into the camera. That's a very, very effective moment. And frankly, maybe this is sacrilege, but maybe this kind of scene could have come in that in medias res, and then you're like, who is this guy? This is crazy. This is an interesting moment. I want to learn more about him that gets him to this point where he's not saying anything, he's staring at the camera and going, I don't know. I felt like that was the moment where I'm like, okay, I feel more connected and understanding of Michael as a character.
Tucker, I think you should talk to Lyle Larritzen Jr.
Yep.
in
I'll get him on the
1945.
horn.
Yeah, get him on the horn.
1945.
That's right.
I think
Go
you
ahead.
guys are totally right. It's a really affecting and effective sequence. The other sequence that I found to be really compelling is when, because to do a little bit of plot speed through, the German guard is sympathetic to Michael and they have a camaraderie. He ends up helping him escape, and then when we find Michael in this bakery with a baker who's sympathetic and is a bit character, but I actually think it's quite interesting. Like, hey, are you a saboteur? Yes. Just tell them tell them you forced me. Hey, the prison food's bad.
the phone's over
eat some
there.
of my
That's good.
Eat some of my pastry. The prison food's not good. I like that, but the moment when Michael calls Toto to get help, puts the phone down, and then looks at the clock and realizes it's 6, and then we have this beautiful, like, semi-opaque shot of Dreyer being executed.
Yeah.
I think
That's a great
that
moment of
is
editing.
extremely effective. I think that is the image of the film.
Sure.
And I think it also, again, it communicates, as the other sequence does, this, I think, really just roiling anger that I think the film is clearly trying to evoke in the audience. I think that is a key portion of the sort of activating quality of it. You have to make the viewer angry. You have to push them to action in some respect. And I think that the scene we were just talking about in this moment too of the execution do that very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Perhaps even the guard killing himself as well. You know, we see the Nazi.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, so my roommate, he is about to go off to bed. I'm like, no, sit down, finish this. So he sits down, and
There's like 10 minutes of movie left.
I'm like,
just sit down.
just finish it, dude. So that sequence begins, and it begins, you know, a bit earlier with Dreyer and Michelle talking about their impending death and how they're both on death row and they're both going to be killed, and they kind of know when it's going to happen, and they're having this you know, intense emotional moment that I think it's pretty effective, and it got to me. But that next moment in which the guard is like, he's like, what's up with these handcuffs? They're different. He's like, okay, you know, make a run for it. We're going to kill the guy. Like, go for it. And then he's like, don't worry about me. You know, we'll see each other. Like, I'm don't worry about me. And then he kills himself because he's kind of become so overwhelmed with a realization of what he's done. And the film is kind of like, I think, providing the opposite. Like, so when, you know, what should you do if you joined them? Well,
Yeah, if you were implicit, well,
yeah.
I got news for you.
Yeah.
Well, I think that that comes in Pritkin's character as well, the mole, for what character we get out of him as this sort of like guy who presents himself with a bit more levity than any other of the saboteur characters, you know. And you kind of get the vibes off when he's like, so when's the factory bombing going down? Give me all the details, pal.
Yeah.
Speaking to my lapel, why don't you? But I think that the moment of him getting found out is also like, it's like standard spy thriller stuff of like the mole getting found out, but you're like, you're right there with him. He's like, yeah, fuck this guy. He seems like a weasel. He's working for the Nazis. Fuck this guy. I love to see him sweat. You know?
do like,
and when he's like handcuffed to the radiator and he's yelling at the top of his lungs, like, I can get you out of here. You idiots. You don't know. You're never gonna win. You don't know. It's all good stuff. I do like that.
yeah.
And then him getting executed off screen, but they keep fucking shooting him.
Yeah,
I think
they shoot
that's
him a
really
bunch of
effective
times.
sound design.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's actually interesting because I think that maybe it's a transfer, but the sound of this movie was really messed up.
Yeah,
and it kept
wasn't
like
great.
peaking our TV, and we're
Like,
just sitting there like,
popping and
Jesus Christ, what's going on here? But you can understand the concepts of a lot of the sound design, but I think whether it's microphone quality, whether it's the film quality, whether it's transfer quality, streaming quality, something happened.
Yeah.
Something went really wrong because it was like, I'm like, not supposed to sound like that. That's fucking crazy. But the visual, the reason I'm like, oh, I don't know if it is necessarily the streaming or the transfer because it looks pretty good.
It does look very good.
The only stream of this movie we were able to find online, it's a very, very obscure film, was on Rumble through. Like,
we could probably link the film in the description.
Yeah.
There's nothing
It was
wrong with
through a
doing that.
Rumble video player on a website called like rarefilm.ge or something.
Yeah, but
very weird.
It looked pretty good visually.
Yeah.
It was like, oh wow, this holds up pretty well. And then just sometimes the audio was just like completely borked.
I want to just
Timo. Okay, go ahead, Abram.
Well, I just wanted to think about Prickin again for a second.
Okay, sure.
And then, frankly, I gotta tell you, boys, I'm almost out of things to say about the movie.
That's all right.
And I think that actually, what I'm gonna say about Prickin is indicative about my thoughts on the film overall. Is that the subplot with Prickin, I think, is well done. The tension is simple, but it's effective. The apple is rotten on the note.
Yeah.
What is remaining of Michael's hands being used to write that, the note coming through, the note being read, the interrogation, the shackling to the radiator, the execution. It's all well filmed. I think it's plenty tense. I feel like you get captivated on a plot level. It's good stuff, but the dimension that's missing, and I agree with Tucker entirely here, is that it doesn't go beyond the plot level.
Yeah.
Prickin is a compelling character in large part because he is clearly younger. And I think that his youth and his position in the narrative is fascinating from the context of the war being fought. And on a plot level, what happens to him is well, pardon the pun, executed. So I think that is the lens through which I really find myself enjoying the movie, but there's nothing to go deeper into there really, other than, again, the thematic ideas. But even the thematic ideas, as we're thinking about Dreyer and Michael reflecting the end of their life, it is, again, partially a position of us watching this film, 80 years later, but it is...
We might want to revisit this one once World War III begins and see how we feel about it then.
That's a great point.
We'll earmark this one. I'll bookmark rarefilm.ge. We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it.
But that's really how I feel about that character line, and frankly, I think the entire movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To me, it's very textual. This is a very movie that, like, it tells you what it's about. It is not interested in you misunderstanding what it's about. The characters speak what you should think, and the film does not really I think the noir cinematography and the pretty impressive set pieces and kind of baseline filmmaking. It's good. It doesn't inspire thematic ideas. Barton Fink was a film that was communicating theme through its filmmaking rather than just through its screenwriting. So, while I'm entertained enough by it, thank God it was only 86 minutes. So, it's fine. I remember the war movie that's better than this. Fritz Lang, Hangman Also Die. It's a similar film about resistance in the face of the Nazis. It's much better.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, because what is really breezy and watchable at 85 minutes is probably a fucking slog at 110. So it's a good length.
If we're doing closing thoughts, I'll sort of echo a lot of the things I think that Abram and Timo were saying, in that, I think this film is effective in moments, and we can laud it for being quite engrossing as a film and as a thriller and as moments an action film. But there is no reason to really be super invested other than on a baseline these guys are fighting Nazis, they're killing Nazis and blowing up their factories, and that's pretty fucking cool, frankly.
That's pretty badass.
But we aren't given a lot of character to chew on. We aren't given a lot of themes to really mull over. And ultimately, it's competently made, and I think there is some, to Timo's point, some cool noir cinematography, especially in some of those outside nighttime cinematography moments.
I feel like most of the movie takes place at night.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when they're outside, it's like these it's like these figures are just shot against an entirely black void. There is no skyline or things out in the distance. It is our characters in the foreground and then just nothingness behind them, which is probably a technological necessity, but also creates some pretty cool imagery, I think, too. But that sort of visual identity does not bleed over into the rest of the film, I don't feel. It just comes across as fairly standard for me. But so that's where I come down on it. Is I'm positive on Red Meadows. I think it's a really quite taut 85 minutes. But we are 5 films in now.
Mm-hmm.
This is our 6th.
This is number 6?
Yeah, 6.
It's not one that's going to last the test of time on this list, I will say.
Yeah.
And that's really where I come down on it. I still do think I disliked this movie, not because it wasn't competently made, and not because the themes and some of the scenes weren't solid to pretty good, but I found it so hard to get into, and once I tried to understand it a little better, I found it to be so simple that I like, this movie doesn't do anything that 10 plus other movies from this time period about the same topic don't do 20 times better and haven't stood the test of time and are some of the greatest movies from its time period. And watch these movies, you want to learn about the experience. You think about Grand Illusion, you think about some of the things by Fritz Lang. It's like there are a lot of filmmakers doing this exact same kind of thing, and some of the ones that we watched for the Last Quest with the Best Picture winners. This is not a topic that we can't find elsewhere, and so this movie ended up feeling very rote to me. I'm like, yeah, this shot composition is fine. Yeah, okay, these characters are not really well established, and this conflict is, it's okay, but like I feel like I've seen this before, and so I found myself not only distant from it because of the writing and the editing and the pacing, but because I felt like I could have just written this out from the beginning.
Sure. You could have, Chuck. Are you saying you could have written Red Meadows better? Are you saying you could have made this movie better on yourself?
No.
Tucker Hazel writing, directing, editing, and starring in all roles.
No. But yeah, I think this is easily the bottom of the movies that we've talked about. Not only because it's the one I like the least, but I think it has the least interesting or distinct to say. We went into this being like, okay, we're gonna show up and watch The Ballad of Narayama and Taste of Cherry, and I've never seen anything like those movies. And it's confusing and it's weird, but it's something very different. It kind of is just a thriller.
Yeah,
it is kind of just about fighting the Nazis. I'm like, doesn't really do much for me.
That's fair. You want to hear some Palme details?
Yeah, while we pull up and fill out our score sheet.
Okay. So this was the first actual Cannes Film Festival.
That's right. The war is over. And
the war is
hallelujah.
over. Exactly. So the jury president for the first few Cannes Film Festivals was... Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to sneeze. Was Georges Huysman, I believe is how you say that. You want to take Georges Huysman? Huysman?
Sure. I don't know.
Huysman.
And he is the founder of the Cannes Film Festival.
Thanks, Georges.
Yeah, as he was created at the behest of the French Prime Minister at the time. If you guys recall my first historical recap of the Cannes Film Festival from episodes ago now.
Charles de Gaulle, right? The Prime Minister.
No, Prime Minister at the time was Jean Zay.
Oh, Charles de Gaulle is a president. Maybe. I don't know. Doesn't matter.
Anyway, there were a lot more films in competition than usual. There were 44 films in competition at this Cannes Film Festival. Notable submissions that didn't win the 11-way tie for the Grand Prix, as it was known at that time. Notable submissions that didn't win were Beauty and the Beast by Jean Cocteau, Gaslight by George Cukor, and Notorious by Alfred Hitchcock.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there were 18 jury members at this first Cannes Film Festival that represented each of the nations that had a film in competition, including those from the Soviet Union, Mexico, and Egypt. So even in its infancy, the Cannes Film Festival was not, wholly European focused.
Yeah.
It was more focused on, sort of artistic expression and creativity rather than competition. As I said, there was an 11-way tie for first place, and as many of the films, as we'll discover, and including this one, were about and in reaction to the ending of World War II.
Sure. As to be expected.
As to be expected if you're having a European film festival in 1945.
Yeah.
But it wasn't without its hiccups, this first Cannes Film Festival, of course. The night before the final awards presentation, the tent blew away in a storm.
They were holding the festival in a tent?
Well, like I guess so. Like the awards were going to be presented in a tent. The reels for Hitchcock's Notorious were shown out of order.
I wonder why I didn't win.
Miguel M. Delgado's The Three Musketeers was actually projected upside down.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oops.
Uh-oh. So yeah.
There's some kinks to work out there.
There's some kinks to work out, but as we mentioned, Red Meadows, one of the 11 films that won in this 1945 Cannes Film Festival.
There's such a spike in the amount of movies I've seen from 1945 versus 44 and 46. Holy shit.
We will be
Okay.
revisiting this year in the future.
Because to
more times.
clarify, we are doing all 11 of these movies.
Yes.
Because they all equally won.
Yes.
Yeah, to clarify.
As did, I believe, the next couple years, they gave it out to like 10 films or 8 films or something like that.
So a giant chunk of our...
Yeah, especially in
Question.
the late 40s and early 50s, there's going to be a overrepresentation.
There's actually like half a year's worth of movies just from those.
Yeah.
Half a year's worth of our reviews worth of those movies. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
crazy.
strap in for more. There's some other ones on the list that are pretty notable from this year, so I'm
There
looking
are,
forward to
there
those.
are.
And even one that we did before.
Exactly.
Wait, what? Which one?
Lost Weekend.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yep.
We didn't do it recently. But
No.
But we've done it before.
We did watch it this year, actually. Watched and reviewed it this year.
That feels like
That
a long
is
time.
crazy.
It does.
Wow.
Okay, shall we score this film?
Yep. Punch it
I
in.
already have.
Boom.
Okay.
I hit mine. Boop. Boom, boom, boom. Wow. Some of us are close, some of us are not. The average is, remove those decimal places, computer, 5.9. So, as we expected, at the bottom of the list, at place number 6, the point breakdown is Tucker gave Red Meadows a 4.1, Tanner gave it a 6, I gave it a 6.5, and then Abram gave it a 6.8. So, I'd say we're more in agreement than not on this one.
Yeah.
Okay?
Seems like it.
Seems like it. Now, the foretold segment is here. It is time to get on our knees and to gesture upwards at the heavens. Because the spin wheel is
Yes.
here.
Undulate towards those heavens, everyone.
Undulation time.
Ready, Timo?
I'm ready.
Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital or is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
And the wheel's deal is number 84.
Number 84 is going to give us a much newer movie from the year 2010. And this is a film directed by Ipichapong Weersethical. And it is starring a bunch of people whose names I never pronounced before, so I'm not going to try. And this is Uncle Boo and Me, who can recall his past lives, which I believe... Oh, no, I thought it was in the top 250 of Letterboxd.
It might have been at one point. This is a very well-regarded film,
Yeah.
a Thai film. So, yeah, I think this is...
And Ipichapong Weersethical directed one of my least favorite movies I've ever seen in my entire life, so I'm really looking forward to this one. I hate Memoria. I hate that movie. It made me mad.
it's a movie that makes you think, so of course.
This one's got a scary guy with red eyes on the
Yeah,
thing.
weird-looking Bigfoot guy.
Yeah.
So,
I'm
hey,
looking
maybe that'll
forward
be
to that.
something.
Yeah. I'm excited for this. I don't know if I've seen any movies from Thailand. So good to expand our minds and take a break from these oldies. You can't do them week after week. We get too tired.
Take a break from the oldies. Let's do the newies. You know, that's what I always say.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Thank you guys for talking about the Rode Enge. Until next time, you know what I always say. Stay warm, keep cool. Peace.
Slut.